Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we discuss potential NBA breakout players for the 2023-2024 season. I did the same video last year. One of my favorites that I had included in last year's video was Nic Claxton of the Brooklyn Nets. I felt really good about kind of the projection and production we've seen from him up to that point last year, and I ended up mocking him as a player who could break out in a big way. Of course he did, receiving Defensive Player of the Year votes, defensive team member votes as well. He had a great year for the Brooklyn Nets, so I thought, hey, let's continue that going into this next year, where we're going to look at a variety of different players who could break out in a big way for their teams or maybe a different team. If you are new to Utility Sports or just enjoy the content in general, make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more content here, and then also hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. Jumping into our video preview here now, we're going to look at 10 players in this video that I expect to take big steps forward or have a breakout next season. For some of these players, that might look like, hey, they get some of that national media recognition. Some of them might actually get a role in the NBA. Not all breakout or big steps look the same, okay? Some players ascend into stardom. Some players find themselves a quality bench role. And I think that's really the fun part of this video, as we see kind of the different levels and layers of the NBA. I do have 3 players who are headed into the second year, essentially, of their careers, which those are really the easy answers. Players you expect to take that big jump from their freshman to sophomore seasons, essentially, in the NBA, from their rookie to second year campaigns. Typically, you see huge jumps anyway, but there was 3 players I specifically wanted to highlight. We also have some players who I expect to transition from G League level players to NBA role players, and I think that's a significant jump forward, and one that is really something that we should commend. The G League has become a really good developmental league where players get to not only grow and improve, but also display what they can bring to an NBA roster, and they've had a lot of examples of players coming from the G League to the NBA, and I think this video is going to highlight a few more guys that I expect. One player who I thought last year was going to take that jump was Trevelin Queen. He in fact did not. I was wrong about that one. Wish I was right. He ended up having another really great G League season. He's not featured in this video, but I wanted to get a little Trevelin Queen shout out. For those of you who are really deep basketball nerds like myself, you're going to exactly know who Trevelin Queen is, and you're going to love the fact that I'm even bringing him up here. Then we're going to talk about some players who are lacking opportunities. Does that change? Does it not? Of course, exposure goes a long way in this as well. And then also just some players naturally grow and improve and expand on their games. And those are some players that I'm going to talk about in this video as well. So I do hope you enjoy. And let's jump into it with my first example of a breakout player. And it's David Duke Jr. for the Brooklyn Nets. Spent this past season playing for the Long Island Nets in the G League, averaged over 20 points a game. He has a very nice handle, really good crossover, and he attacks downhill well. He did play for the Brooklyn Nets a bit this year, although his role was rather sporadic. And then the Nets, of course, trading Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant. The team is just completely different. And I think David Duke Jr., who was recognized as one of the best players in the G League this past year, just because of his performance, I think he's in a position where we're going to see Brooklyn probably consolidate their roster a little bit. There's going to be some heavy trades of role players and picks, in my opinion, to go do something to kind of reshape and navigate this roster a little bit. And because of that, we're going to see maybe Spencer Dinwiddie go out the door or some other pieces on this roster. And I think it's going to open up opportunities for David Duke Jr., who was a really talented college player. I liked him a lot. And I think now going into this next season is really the opportunity we're going to see him be given a chance to expand his role. And I think he's going to not only earn that opportunity, but I think he's going to take advantage of it as well. So I'm really excited to watch David Duke Jr. continue to grow. Again, this is kind of one of those examples of a G League guy who I see going to an NBA level player, and I think he's one of the better G League players currently. Of course, to get that kind of call up to serious NBA minutes, you have to be one of the best G League guys. Typically, that's what we see unless you're on a tanking team at the end of the year. I think David Duke Jr. has positioned himself with his own dedication to his game, the improvement we've seen from him from where he was as a draft prospect a couple of years ago to where he currently is. He's a player I'm excited about, honestly, and I'm hoping that we see him in an expanded role as early as this next season. Going into our next player here, we have Usman Garuba of the Houston Rockets, and I actually really struggled to not include like 8 Houston Rockets in this video. We're going to end the video with an honorable mentions category where we're going to shout out some more Houston Rockets for sure. There's actually another one featured in this video as well as a potential breakout guy. But Usman Garuba, for me, I liked him coming out of Spain for his own draft. Defensively, he's extremely versatile. And when I think about kind of the differences between Steven Silas and Ime Udoka as a head coach, I think the impact on winning and the importance of the defensive side of the ball is going to be really the main differentiating factor. Now, I think Silas and Udoka are completely different head coaches, and that's a good thing for Houston. They're going to be significantly better already because of that coaching adjustment. And Garuba is going to be one of those players who I think could stand out in a big way because of that, because I just think he's going to find ways to get onto the floor. Now, I know he played a decent amount of minutes. Offensively, he's still rather raw. I think the Rockets were trying to figure out what position is he really offensively. They were playing him a lot at small ball 5. I think you can't really assign him a position. He's kind of just an athlete. Swiss Army knife was the phrase and verbiage I like to use when I was kind of evaluating him coming out of the Spain for his draft. Is he's a Swiss Army knife defensively. He can guard multiple positions. He's athletic. He can challenge vertically. Doesn't have to block shots to be a good interior defender, which is something kind of rare to see for smaller players. Kind of reminds me of PJ Tucker in that regard, just because he's got really lengthy arms and he's strong and physical. Now, he's not PJ Tucker good yet, but I think that if there's going to be a coach that kind of pulls the most out of Usman Garuba, I think there's a good argument to be had that would be Ime Udoka, who is a very smart and intuitive defensive mind. I think he's done a lot of really good things for the NBA in his short tenure as a head coach, only 1 year in Boston. And I think that we've seen even this past year teams start to copy and emulate what he was doing, especially in his pick and roll coverages. And I think Usman Garuba is going to be a guy that he's going to utilize in those similar roles, especially next to Alperen Şengün, which maybe sounds a little weird because of the offensive spacing. But I think with how comfortable Udoka was with both Al Horford and Robert Williams on the floor, I think he's going to definitely experiment with Şengün and Garuba sharing the floor together. Now, I know it's a significantly different duo because Horford shoots, Garuba really doesn't. But Alperen Şengün definitely more offensively talented than Robert Williams. So there's a little bit of give and take there. I think Houston's going to have a variety of lineups that they try out, especially early on. And I'm interested to see what Garuba's minutes look like. I think training camp's going to be an important kind of setting for him to establish his energy, effort, and his motor. That Garuba is going to find himself a role on the team, and then he's going to not only play in that role, but he's going to excel in that role, and that's really what I'm banking on here with this projection. Going on to our next player, we have a Sacramento King who mostly has played for the Stockton Kings, and that's Neemias Queta, who he is a really solid big man. And I think that when it comes to Sacramento currently, you think about Trey Lyles, who he's a really nice backup big. My expectation is that he would be back in Sacramento, which does kind of diminish the opportunity Neemias Queta could see. Now, he was one of the 10 best G League players this past season, received all G League honors, which is essentially the all NBA honors, but for G League players. So he was really productive down with the Stockton Kings, put up a ton of rebounds, blocks a ton of shots. He's kind of that perfect, like, versatile, athletic big man that you're looking for, who can roll downhill, catch lobs, and finish around the rim. Is kind of developing a right hook, as we have seen in the last couple of years, from where he was as a draft prospect to where he currently is. And then I also think that, defensively, he's going to challenge around the rim. He's going to, like I said, block shots and be impactful in that regard. And because of that, I think that there is an opportunity for Sacramento, as Mike Brown kind of looks at what his team was really good at and what they weren't great at. I think a little bit more athleticism in the front court, and I think defensively getting a guy who can block some shots in there. Sacramento ranked bottom 3 in the NBA in shots blocked per game. From a defensive standpoint, they're just not very athletic. Of course, when you have Domantas Sabonis as your true center, you're probably not going to block a ton of shots, which is okay. You can still be a solid team, and obviously they've shown that this past year. But if you want to be able to switch some things up, I think Queta could play into a really nice role for them. But who knows? Maybe he finds himself in a different situation. I think if I was GMing a team right now, he'd be one of those names that probably not very valued around the market, but I think a player who can impact winning in a big way. And I think he's ready for a jump. I see a lot of the same things in Queta that I saw in Nick Claxton a few years ago. Now I think Queta a little bit more raw, probably not quite as ready as Claxton. So I'm not saying he's going to be, one of the best defenders in the league next year, but I think we're going to see him take that G League to NBA jump. Then maybe a couple of years from now, we see him take another big jump forward, but I'm not necessarily there quite yet. But I think, again, we're seeing baby steps with him. And I think that baby step next year is going to be a big one where we see him actually take a pretty sizable leap into a role, whether it's with the Kings or another franchise. I think at the end of the day, we're going to see Kate on the floor a lot more than we have up to this point. Going into our next player, we have Obi Toppin of the New York Knicks. And you see I have a little bit of a question mark there because I think the Knicks are in a position to potentially leverage a trade this offseason. They have so many tradable draft picks. They've got young players to do it as well. Of course, Emmanuel quickly kind of broke out big time this year for this team. Quentin Grimes had a really nice season for the Knicks. I think that they would like to keep those two guys if they were making a big time trade, which maybe points your fingers towards RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin as the young players who could potentially go out the door. So maybe Obi Toppin is breaking out for a different team other than the New York Knicks. And that's kind of an example here of, hey, maybe a change of scenery opens up more opportunities for a player, because even when they drafted Obi Toppin, I think the entire Knicks organization really liked him. I know a lot of people in the draft community liked him as well. I myself loved Obi Toppin. Then again, I'm a Dayton Flyers fan, so I was a little bit biased, but I thought he had a lot of the tools that you need to have to be a really talented four in today's NBA. I think he's also progressed significantly as a shooter. I think his live ball decision making has taken serious strides forward as well from where he was at Dayton, more as a finisher and kind of a one-dimensional player with the ball in his hands. I think he's taken significant steps forward. Not something we've seen a ton from the New York Knicks in terms of development over the last 30 years, but definitely in the last few years, they've been really good at developing young players. Obi Toppin's another example. And I think after drafting him, he was just logjam behind Julius Randle, who's been really good for the Knicks. And I can't say that they made a mistake by playing Randle as many minutes as they have, because he's been really good for them. But I think Obi Toppin's ready to take a significant step forward. I think if either the Knicks give him that opportunity or another franchise jumps in and finds a way to land Obi, I think he could really break out in a big way. Not to even just a point of being like a consistent 25-minute a game guy. I'm talking like scoring the ball, like a significant point value a game, anywhere from 12 to 15, 16 points a game. I know that doesn't sound crazy, but it's a sizable number to be putting up. And that's, putting you in the category of a third or fourth option on the team for a lot of different situations. That's a really high impact player. I think, you look around teams in the league, I think the Dallas Mavericks, if they had an Obi Toppin, who, by the way, he'd be the most athletic guy on their roster, it would be a huge addition for them and just something that they don't have. And you could really look at a bunch of different teams that way across the board, where teams, there's like a real rarity for skilled size with elite athleticism. And I think Obi Toppin may be still in the development process for some of that skill at his size, but where he's currently at, the athleticism, the frame, it's all off the charts. And now it's about having an opportunity to consistently show that. Tom Thibodeau did lean into Obi Toppin a little bit more in the playoffs, and at times he has kind of given the minutes to Obi, but I think he's ready to take a significant step forward and play constant minutes and very consistent rotation minutes, where he's a high impact guy for a team and very impactful on winning, I think, at the end of the day too, because he can screen roll, he can make decisions out of that short roll if you need him to, although I wouldn't say do it all the time. I think you can get away with it. So Obi Toppin, a player who I think is ready to break out in a big way sooner rather than later. Going into our next player now, going on to the Washington Wizards, and we're talking about Deni Avdija. I actually talked about Deni Avdija in my most recent video on the channel before this one, where I discussed the Washington Wizards and if a rebuild is incoming or not. I definitely recommend checking that video out. But for me, Deni Avdija is going to be a good, important piece for the Washington Wizards long term, as long as they don't trade him. And I think the Wizards right now, undergoing some management changes, they're in a position to kind of foster the removal of Kristaps Porzingis and Kyle Kuzma from the organization. I know that sounds like a huge step forward. I think that's a huge step backward, but I do think long term it's a good step forward, because you kind of pick a lane, choose a direction, and that direction is losing, but it also does thrust certain players into bigger roles, more expanded opportunities. And I think a player who's really ready for that is Deni Avdija, who has mostly flashed defensively up to this point. I think for him, Deni Avdija, if you go back to kind of the things he was great at out of Maccabi Tel Aviv as a draft prospect for his own class, a lot of it kind of hinged on him having the ball in his hands, being a decision maker, handling in the pick and roll, being a transition ball handler, and just ultimately playing with the rock. And in Washington, it's been kind of a tough opportunity for him. You think about some of the teammates he's had, whether that's Russell Westbrook, of course, Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, Kristaps Porzingis. The ball has naturally found those guys' hands because of who they are, the name brand, the kind of star power that Washington has actually been able to have inside the building. It's been pretty significant. Now, it's not 1A superstars, but it's been a lot of very notable names and guys who are going to demand and receive touches. And I think because of that, the areas that Deni Avdija is best, which is, again, ball in his hands, making decisions and using his size and passing capabilities to his advantage, we haven't seen him in that role. And because of that, I think the offensive production has been a little up and a little down at times. And realistically, I think if they are undergoing a rebuild, we're going to see Kuzma out the door, Porzingis out the door, and Avdija could be a player that we see take not a Lauri Markkanen jump. It's very hard to predict anyone to take a Lauri Markkanen jump because that's so unprecedented throughout the history of the NBA. But I think just, again, higher volume, higher usage. Typically for a lot of players, that means their efficiencies are going to go down. I think Deni Avdija is kind of a rhythm player, and having the ball in his hands a little bit more frequently, I think is going to help him expand his game, showcase to more people what he's going to be able to display on a night in, night out basis. And I do believe in Deni Avdija's talent. It's just about the opportunity, which he hasn't had so far because of the situation he's landed in. Is he in a spot now where he's going to have an opportunity to showcase his talents? Yes. Does it mean the team's going to win a bunch of games? Probably not. In fact, if you ask me right now, I think the Wizards are the most likely team to have the fewest wins next season. But at the end of the day, I think Deni Avdija is going to kind of display his individual talent. And I think it's going to be really good for his career if he's given that opportunity. Going on to our next one, and I couldn't decide on just one for the San Antonio Spurs, so I had to decide on two. And it's players who, in my opinion, these two guys have already broken out, honestly. But I don't think that there's enough national recognition for them for anyone outside of San Antonio. Spurs fans understand how good these two kids are. I don't think anyone else really does. Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson. Two really young, dynamic wings who complement each other very, very well. I was super high on Devin Vassell when he came out of Florida State. Typically, Seminoles have a special place in my heart. Leonard Hamilton just gets those guys right, especially defensively. I think Devin Vassell had so many intriguing traits coming out of college. And then Keldon Johnson was an extremely good value for a draft pick with where they were able to draft him. But then after that, they went in and gave him one of the best contracts in the entire NBA, maybe the best contract in NBA history, where he's on a descending contract through 2027. He's going to be making like $17 million at the kind of beginning of his prime, which is just incredible because the cap's going to jump up. The Spurs are going to have a massive kind of saving opportunity there because Keldon's going to be making so little, but giving them so much on the court. And honestly, for these two guys, they're very different, but they play similar positions, and they're going to have a lot more eyes on them now with Victor Wembanyama landing in San Antonio. I think there's going to be way more national coverage, way more attention to the Spurs, which I think is really good for basketball. The Spurs did need some more love, more attention. And I think that realistically, they have some good pieces to already complement Victor Wembanyama. Devin Vassell, I think an emerging three-level scorer in the league, somebody who plays very balanced, has a really good mid-range pull-up, one of the better mid-range pull-ups in the NBA, honestly. I think that might sound crazy to hear right now, but he executes it very well. And then Keldon Johnson, one of the best screen navigators in the NBA. One thing that always stands out to me, people love to talk about San Antonio's kind of development pathway and kind of how well players grow and develop there. I think the most obvious area of this is defensive screen navigation and just pick and roll defense in general, which I think Keldon Johnson and Victor Wembanyama are going to arguably become the best defensive duo in the league. You could make a case for, because Keldon Johnson does a really great job getting over and around screens. You think about when kind of Kawhi Leonard came into the league and how much he grew defensively. I've seen similar growth from Keldon Johnson. Now, I don't think he's as good of a defensive player as Kawhi Leonard ever was. I'm not suggesting that. Kawhi Leonard had some unique, special, one-of-a-kind traits that really separated him from everybody else at the time. Keldon Johnson is not that, but he's taken huge strides forward, similar to how Kawhi did early in his career. And I think Keldon Johnson, with his kind of ability to maneuver laterally defensively, and then Victor Wembanyama's sheer size behind him, playing in likely drop coverage, I would assume, Keldon's going to be able to mitigate some of those other looks that you get out of drop coverage, whether that's a mid-range pull-up, a three-point shot working around the screen, just a little bit over the mesh point. Keldon Johnson's going to do a great job shutting a lot of those down. These two guys are really good, Vassell and Keldon Johnson. I wouldn't even, again, recognize this as a breakout. I think that they've already shown that they're very good players, but I think the rest of the NBA hasn't quite seen it yet, because this team hasn't been very good. And when they were, DeJounte Murray was kind of the lead dog, and he was the player that most people focused on. I think Vassell, huge step forward this past year. I think he's going to take another step forward. I think Keldon Johnson is going to get a lot more love and recognition playing alongside Victor Wembanyama. I think the Spurs team does have a lot of really nice pieces to continue to cook with. As we go into our next team here, we're talking about the Houston Rockets, and this time specifically focusing on Tari Eason, a player that I became enamored with in last year's draft. This is one of those examples of a second-year player, and typically these are players you want to bet on taking a big step forward. Usually the first-year rookie year, you hit that rookie wall. Physically, you end up running out of gas by the end of the year. And just you're learning and adjusting to the NBA on the fly. Just like anything, any other job, you get better at it the longer you've been doing it. And I think these second-year guys, we're going to see that. But Tari Eason specifically is one of those players that I talked about how Usman Garuba might find like a real niche and role with the Houston Rockets. Tari Eason might just flat out become one of the mainstays for Houston Rockets basketball, because he possesses all of the physical traits and tools that I think Usman Garuba would kind of dream of in a forward, just with his size, athleticism, ability to play downhill, willingness to play through, and kind of look for contact, is something that separates Tari Eason from a lot of other young players. And I think that with his rebounding capabilities, what we're going to see from him defensively, just with kind of freak athleticism and just want to nature, Tari Eason is going to be a player that there's going to be a lot of jerseys sold. Tari Eason is going to become a fan favorite. I know a lot of people in Houston already really like him, but around the league, I think there's going to be a lot more recognition. And I think he's already kind of shown too, just through his college career, that he's a player that, hey, maybe he takes a year to adjust. Had his first year at Cincinnati. No one really took him serious as a draft prospect. Transferred to LSU. Came off the bench for that team, but put up monster production and ended up becoming the 17th overall pick in the draft. And I think now Houston's, when they took Tari Eason, I was just so in love with that selection. It was such a good pick for them, and I think that they're really going to start to see that pay dividends as early as next year. And I'm really looking forward to Tari Eason's ascension into being a really good player in the NBA. Going into our next one, we're looking at Jaden Ivey from the Detroit Pistons. And this is one thing that always bugs me when we talk about the NBA draft, is people expect those year one results. Jaden Ivey was pretty solid for a rookie, averaged around 16 points a game, poured in about 4 rebounds, 4 assists a night, kind of exactly what I expected from him coming into his rookie season as a non-finished product, a non-polished product. I think there's a lot of areas that Jaden Ivey had to grow in. And Dwayne Casey, I don't know if he necessarily provided that, I would say, infrastructure and development programming that Ivey needed. There are serious flaws to Jaden Ivey's game. I think right now playing off of 2 feet would be one of them. Offensively, I think he needs to play with a little bit more balance. And then defensively, again, balance. He finds himself reaching and lunging out of position and just honestly doesn't know how to keep his chest in front of another guy and between his guy and the rim. And I think that those are some very easy corrections because he possesses all of the physical tools, and I think he's got the shot making and the downhill force to become a real problem in the NBA. It's just about seeing him put it all together. And typically for guards, especially guards who are not 6'7", 6'8" it takes a year or two to break out and to really showcase what you are. Even John Morant, which is kind of funny because that's the player that a lot of people compare Jaden Ivey to pre-draft, and I think that there were good understanding or good rationale behind some of those points just from an athletic perspective. I think you look back at John Morant, who his rookie season was really good, ended up winning Rookie of the Year of his class, but look at the sophomore jump he took. And I think Jaden Ivey's going to be in a position to potentially take a similar jump. Now, it doesn't mean that he becomes, again, a John Morant level player, but I think he's going to take a really significant stride forward. And I think Monty Williams being there in Detroit is going to be a big reason why. The Pistons went out and paid Monty Williams a lot of money for a very good reason, and it's because he understands the game of basketball. He oversaw the changing of the guard in Phoenix, where he turned Phoenix into a significantly better team than they were, and I think he's going to do the same thing in Detroit, and I think Jaden Ivey is going to be one of the main benefactors of that, and I'm really excited for Jaden Ivey in year 2 of his career. Jumping into another second-year player, or kind of a rookie, Chet Holmgren from the Oklahoma City Thunder, who has not played an NBA game yet. Of course, we did see him in the Summer League last year. Then he ended up getting hurt in a league where it was an NBA-sponsored type of league where he didn't lose his contract, nothing crazy like that. But again, he wasn't playing in the NBA in that moment when he hurt his foot against LeBron James. Kind of a freak injury. People are going to say, ha, told you so. Just be patient here. Chet Holmgren's going to be awesome, and I think specifically for Oklahoma City, a lot of the things that we saw this team lacking in terms of just overall length, size, and then talent at that position, it's going to night and day change their team for the better. OKC really didn't have rim protection out of Jalen Williams, the Arkansas version. You can also point to their guards, the Jalen Williams Santa Clara version, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, kind of as their main shot blockers. And then Jalen Williams, the Arkansas version, didn't really block a ton of shots, but he took a lot of charges, which protects the rim in a different fashion. But this team just badly needed more length and shot blocking, and that's exactly what Chet Holmgren is going to bring. And you think about some of the players who are playing at the 5-man position. Mike Muscala, Dario Saric. Not terrible players, but not Chet Holmgren level talents either. Chet Holmgren's ability to put the ball on the deck, shoot from behind the 3-point line, drive and finish, and then also make plays off the drive where he's a passer with a live dribble. It's just going to all perfectly flow into what Oklahoma City actually wants to do with their team. This team's going to become very dangerous. They're really set up for the better long term. And Chet Holmgren's going to be a massive addition for this team and just overall kind of changed even the complexion of, hey, a year ago I was saying this team's way closer to being a playoff team than anyone else suspects, just because I was a big believer in Shai, and I also just believed in Giddey, and I thought Jalen Williams was a really nice pick for them. Just overall, I like their team composition. They had a lot of smart, high IQ players who can kind of make a whole bunch of different players better just because of their ability to drive, kick, kind of draw on a defense and keep the ball moving. And I think Chet Holmgren's going to be like kind of that penultimate piece of, look, maybe this team's not fully ready yet to go and win a title, but with, again, maybe a small add or two in the future, outside of that, Chet Holmgren gets you so much closer. And I'm just really excited to watch Oklahoma City play with him because they're already a fun, exciting young team to watch without him, but with him, they're going to be so much better. And I think they're just going to be a team that, honestly, at some point, we're going to be talking about them as a real, serious title contender and maybe at some point a title favorite out of the Western Conference. Going into our final player before the honorable mentions, and this is really the player that I wanted to discuss most in this video, Jaden McDaniels of the Minnesota Timberwolves, who in my opinion got absolutely robbed from making all defense this past year. The seatbelt, as I like to call him, is one of the best defenders in the NBA. And I know that sounds like hyperbole. It's not. He is ridiculously good defensively. Night in, night out, Minnesota tasked him with guarding the best ball handler on the other team, whether that was Darius Garland for Cleveland, whether that was a wing. Say they were playing the Clippers, he's probably matched up with Paul George. Some nights he's guarding LeBron James. He's guarding the best player pretty much every single night. And by the way, on top of that, he's also the second best rim protector on the team behind Rudy Gobert, which makes him a very unique hybrid defender in the NBA that you just typically don't see that type of player come around very often, where he's able to not only defend out on the perimeter with some serious size and length, which is really one of McDaniels' greatest assets defensively, but then he also has the timing, the awareness, the rotation capabilities to slide back in defensively, block shots. Plus, he blocked over 10 3-point shots this year, which puts him in very unique company. You think about a Bol as another example that has done that. So McDaniels just really good timing. He's one of the better defensive players. And I think offensively, we saw him take a step forward up to around 12, 13-ish points a game this past year. I think he's ready for another big step. And I think Minnesota, whether they trade Karl-Anthony Towns or not, they're going to start to pivot slowly to this Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards duo, which is really the future of Minnesota Timberwolves basketball. Those two guys are going to be the guys that are the definition of what this team is going to look like and what they should look like. And it's going to start on the defensive end. Ant and McDaniels, both special defenders. Ant's already kind of taken that big step forward offensively. I think McDaniels is ready to do that now as well. And I think he's going to be a player that we see maybe average 17, 18, 19 points a game. To me right now, he is the player that I expect to win most improved player next season. I know it's a lot of praise, a lot of expectation placed on him, but I think with how the season ended, he's going to be itching to get back out there. Of course, he broke his own wrist in the tunnel. Not a good look for him individually, but I think he's going to want to redeem himself. And I think he's going to put himself in a position to not only kind of improve his own stock, and he's about to get paid. Anthony Edwards notably changed his agency to the same one that represents Jaden McDaniels. So it looks like the two of those guys are planning to tie their futures together in Minnesota for the long haul. And I think McDaniels is going to be the player that we see the biggest jump from and the most growth. He's got the on-ball skills to create for himself. He flashed that a ton at the University of Washington, and I'm really stoked to see what's next for Jaden McDaniels, a player that I'm so enamored with, and I think he's just one of the better young players in the league, and I think most people don't know that yet, but they will by next year for sure. So let's jump into some honorable mentions, guys that I didn't want to spend a ton of time on, because I can't name every single player. That wouldn't be very fun, because it's like, oh, well, you just named everybody. But there are guys who I really was close to including on this list for a variety of reasons. Shaedon Sharpe, I think a lot of people have that expectation already, so I didn't want to include him. Kind of seems like the easy, oh, well, everyone thinks Shaedon Sharpe's going to be a superstar. So, you know, I don't even know if I see superstar for him. I just think he's going to be a good player for sure. So I would have definitely included him if there was a little bit less buzz around him. Jabari Smith Jr., Jalen Green, and Darius Days from Houston. Of course, Jabari Smith makes sense. Jalen Green, I think a lot of people expect that as well. Darius Days is kind of an interesting one. He's one of those G League players who I think could take a jump to the NBA. He used to play at LSU, multi-year career for the LSU Tigers. And he actually finished top 5 this past year in the G League in three-pointers made, but he offers some pretty solid size to him. He's going to play kind of that hybrid power forward role where he can step out, knock down some threes, but also defend across a few positions. To me, he's kind of reminiscent of JaMychal Green and what JaMychal Green used to give. And you might say, oh, well, that's not great. But again, that's that big jump from being a G League contributor to an NBA level player. That's a significant jump, and I think that's a big breakout for Darius Days, who we're going to see him take that step at some point. I'm hoping it's this next year, but maybe it's a year or two from now. Jalen Suggs, still don't sell your stock on Suggs. I think he's just a good player, winning player. He's going to make impactful plays. And I think the NBA has been a little bit more of an adjustment to him, kind of what we talked about with Jaden Ivey. Finishing around the rim is always tough for smaller, younger guards. Suggs is predicated. His offensive game is predicated on finishing. So the fact that it's taken a couple of years for him to adjust and really become what he's going to be in the NBA shouldn't be surprising. You know, think about a lot of players who get traded before they hit their prime and then teams end up regretting it. Don't sell your stock on Suggs. I think he's just going to be a good player. Now, maybe he's not going to be an all-star like a lot of people expected. I don't think I ever really saw that from him myself personally. I kind of thought his ceiling was maybe like a 1 or 2 time all-star. I think a lot of people kind of had expectations that he was going to be like this Hall of Fame level player. I don't think that, obviously, but I think he's still going to be a high level contributor at some point. Dalano Banton, kind of a fun answer for Toronto with their new hiring of their head coach Darko, who's got really good roots in player development. I think Dalano Banton might be one of those players who's given an opportunity to showcase his talent. He's got a big, wiry frame. He's very strong with the basketball, and he's a pretty solid ball handler, decision maker for his size. So he'll be a player that we have to keep our eyes on. I've loved Dalano Banton for about as long as I can remember, coming out of Nebraska. Just an intriguing talent. And then Jalen, Duren, Mark Williams, coming out of Detroit and Charlotte, respectively. To me, both of these players have already broken out. I think people give Jalen Duren a lot of respect currently. I think he's going to be the next Bam Adebayo. That's what I was quoted as saying during his draft process. I just loved his talent. I think the physicals are all there. The IQ is there. The switchability defensively is there. Jalen Duren is just going to be a really good player, I believe. Mark Williams started to break out at the end of last year, where he started to put up monster numbers once he was in the starting lineup for good. And I think those two guys, I couldn't realistically include them in this video just because I felt like, look, they're both second-year players, kind of obvious answers to begin with. But then outside of that, I think they had really productive rookie seasons in the minutes that they had, in the roles that they had. So it's just like, is it really a breakout, or what are we kind of thinking here? So you'll see for some of these players like, Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, I kind of felt the same way as well, that, hey, they've already shown a decent amount. So it's not like these players are coming out of nowhere. But I do want to, touch on some of these guys. You could have maybe made a case for Cade Cunningham too, just coming off of injury. But I don't know. I didn't want to kind of say all the easy, obvious ones, but I did want to mention them here at the end, just in case you were curious where I felt about some of these guys. Thank you all so much for watching. I really did have a lot of fun recording this video, talking about some potential breakout players for this next NBA season. Leave me your list down in the comment section below. I would love to hear who you think could break out big time in the NBA next year. Maybe I missed a guy or two. I would love to hear your list again down below. If you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.